Hey everybody, so I wanted to talk to you today about kind of prioritizing your homestead and what that looks like in the sense of starting with nothing. So if you're looking at coming into homesteading, buying raw land, it can be very different than if you just have a house and barns and everything already set up on your property. This is coming from the fact that I had a conversation with a woman the other day. Now I will say she had no idea that we've been living an off-grid lifestyle for 6 months. But she and I were talking, and I said something about chickens. And she asked if we had any. I said, no, not yet. We have the nest boxes and everything else. We just haven't been able to build the coops and things like that we need to. And her immediate response was, well, the first thing I'm getting when I move on to my homestead is chickens. And I thought, okay, great. Like, all right, that's awesome. Good for you. But it was after I kind of explained the fact that we've been living off grid for 6 months and had zero infrastructure on this property when we bought it, that she kind of changed her tune a little bit. And I took no offense to it, but I just thought it was kind of interesting to hear someone who hasn't homesteaded before, and that was their first response, because there's so much more that goes into homesteading, guys, than just getting some chickens. Let's be real here. So when you're coming onto a homestead, and a lot of people, I mean, you may buy a house that has barns and everything else, or you may buy raw land, or you may just buy a property that has a house but no barns, no kind of infrastructure for animals whatsoever. There's certain things you have to think about. And so like when my husband and I bought this property, we bought it knowing there was no infrastructure, and we were perfectly fine with that. And I want to say that one of the most beautiful and frustrating but at the same time things about that is we get to create it as our own, completely our own. We don't have really any prior, the people who own this property beforehand really didn't do anything except for dig out a few ponds, and even then we've changed that up some. It's just one of those things where it's really beautiful to be able to create something from nothing, but then at the same time it can be a little frustrating because it takes forever to get anything done. But with that being said, when you're moving out onto a homestead, and whether you have a house or not, aside from the construction, electrical, that kind of deal, you have to think about all the different things that goes into a homestead. So if you're starting a homestead from nothing whatsoever, there's no infrastructure for a homestead on your property, you have to think about fencing. How are you going to keep your livestock in the area that you need it to be in? And also, how are you going to keep the predators out? Even if you have your chickens completely cooped up all the time, raccoons, possums, other kind of animals, that predatory type animals, depending on where you live, like weasels and stuff like that, they can all reach into your chicken coop, snatch your chickens' heads off, things like that. It's one of those things where you can still, snakes, that's a big thing. You can still lose animals even if you have them completely pinned in all the time, because predators are really awesome at figuring out how to still get the food that they want to get. So for us, we had to think about, with knowing that we were bringing our sheep up here, electric fencing. And just to fence in, we already had fencing in place on the property. There were T-posts with barbed wire on them, because this did used to be grazed from cattle. Somebody leased the land for cattle. So it already had the fencing in place, which was amazing, because that alone can run you thousands and thousands of dollars. But we needed electric fencing for our animals and to keep our dogs in as well too. And that was probably almost $1,000 just to do the 10 acres that we did. And we have 20 acres of pasture, so we only did half of it. But that alone is a big chunk of change right there. You also have to think about food for your animals. Now, while we do strictly grass-fed, we have no grain or anything like that. And we have a massive stand of grass on our property, so we don't really have to worry about it. If you are planning on doing hay or grain or anything like that, you have to think about how much that's going to cost to feed your animals. So you're not just feeding yourself, but you're feeding your animals as well. If you have dogs, if you have cats to keep the mice away, I will tell you, I think one of our cats alone has killed 5 mice rat things since we've lived here that I've found. And I'm sure she's killed more than that. So cats are totally worth it, mind you. But you have to think about how much feed goes into feeding your animals. And then also water. How are you going to keep them hydrated when it's really cold out and things like that, and water can freeze and whatnot. So structures, we have rabbits. Sorry, I was just looking at the rabbits actually. We have rabbits. We created a nesting area for all our rabbits so that they have their own little nest box, but they have areas to roam and this, that, and the other thing. And so there's a lot of stuff that goes into creating the actual infrastructure around the animals. And that's something you have to think about before you even get the animals. You can't buy animals and have nothing to protect them and then have them completely picked off. That's completely illogical to do. We got our sheep in 2014. There was 27 of them. There had been 300 in the flock. But you know what happened? They had no electric fencing. They have no livestock guardian dogs. And they just let their sheep roam on their 400 acres. And they got picked off to from 300 to 27 in just a few years because the coyotes found them. Guys, once predators find food, they will come back over and over and over again. And when you have chickens, you don't just have ground predators, you have aerial predators as well too. Eagles, hawks, everything else, any kind of bird of prey will come and snatch up those chickens. They can snatch up full-grown chickens too. Even owls can snatch up chickens. So you have to think about your infrastructure. You have to think about the cost of your infrastructure and what goes into that, with the type of animals you want and everything else too. You also have to think about the seasons. We came into this property in beginning of May. So we were, it's still springtime, we still had summer and everything else too, but May is super crazy wet here in Oklahoma. So getting any kind of major structure work done at that time was not going to happen. And then, sorry, I don't want my kid in the background, but basically, we had to think about the timing of which we got everything. Also with the sheep, we didn't bring them up until the rainy season was somewhat over because it gets drier here. So it gets pretty wet down in the field and we wanted to make sure that our sheep didn't get hoof rot or anything like that. So you have to think about the time and the seasons that you're bringing your animals onto the property. While yes, we could probably still bring the chickens onto the property right now. Obviously we need to create the coops and everything else for them, but right now you have to think about too, it's getting winter time. How are we going to keep ourselves warm in the winter? How are we going to keep our sheep warm in the winter? How are we going to keep our dogs and cats warm in the winter? We already have animals. Oh, and our rabbits. We already have animals that we have to take care of. So bringing more animals onto the property when we already have ones that we need to make sure we manage properly ahead of time isn't necessarily the best idea. So it's just kind of some things to think about when you are homesteading, that it's not just, oh, I'm going to get a house and I'm going to get some land and I'm going to stick some chickens on it and I'll be great. That's not the way it works, guys. Unfortunately, I wish it was that easy, but it's not. You have to have ways to protect them and take care of them and feed them and everything else. And even with gardening and everything else, you have to have a way to keep your garden protected from either your livestock, like we had the issue with, or wild animals. Deer love gardens, guys. So it's just one of those things to think about. Think about your infrastructure, think about your infrastructure costs, and really, really think about okay, what do you want on your homestead? Okay, if you want chickens first, that's great. But think about what you need to do to take care of them and take care of them properly. Do your research too. Don't just get chickens and have no idea what you're doing, because you can kill them very easily. Chickens are not, hard to kill. So, think about that stuff, guys. Do your research ahead of time. Be mindful of the work that it's going to take in building in that infrastructure. Also be mindful of the finances it's going to take to put that infrastructure in place before you even get the animals. I don't know about y'all. We're not working off some unlimited income and things like that. My husband is working full-time now. So even then, you have to think about that too. What's your homestead going to look like if one or both of you are working full-time? He works full-time. I'm here at the homestead. So it's one of those things where we have to think about too, how are we going to plan our time for when he's off for the things I can't do on my own. So just some things to think about, guys. Of course, if you have questions at any time, please be sure to drop them in the comments below. Just some things to think about if you're starting off a homestead from nothing, because I don't want you to get in the situation where your animals or livestock or anything like that start dying because you weren't properly prepared. It sucks to lose animals. We've lost plenty over the last, 8 years. And I don't want it to happen to y'all. So just some things to think about. Hope y'all have a great day. Bye.